weather. So I'm really excited to have my work here at the museum. I think this is a fabulous space, one of the best spaces in Ohio, perchance. It's a great venue. And when I heard that there was a possibility that I would have my work here, I was very excited. It gave me an opportunity to work even larger than I normally do. And 12 foot is pretty large, but when I heard that this opportunity was a possibility, I started thinking about 30 feet. And the piece that you see just as you enter is part and parcel because I was able to show at this venue. So that would not have happened. My name is Michelle Stitzlein, and I am from Baltimore, Ohio. We live and work in Baltimore. It is just southeast of Columbus, maybe an hour and 20 minutes from here. And if you're familiar with Lancaster or Pickerington, it's very close to those communities. And we live in a former Grange Hall. I am originally from Coshocton, Ohio, which is even further east. You may be familiar with Roscoe Village and so forth. I attended CCAP, and I was born in 1967, and I've been working with recycled materials since the year 2000, so about 17 years. This is our home and studio, a former Grange Hall. We purchased it at auction in the year 2000, and we live downstairs and we work upstairs. And at the time we were looking for unusual spaces to create our artwork. We were looking at schoolhouses, railroad stations, anything with large open space. And we found this facility in Nathaniel's. We grew up in Baltimore. So when we arrived, I saw the wide open spaces, and of course, wanting to work as an artist, this looked like a real opportunity. But this is the before photo. And a lot of people would say, including me, that it's kind of a homely building. It's a straightforward concrete block. And we do a lot of traveling. So we were looking for inspiration to jazz up our building, if you will. And I think that when I teach at schools, I talk to students a lot about color and how sometimes we're fearful of color in the United States specifically when it comes to large swaths of color on our buildings and architectural statements. Our clothing is quite bright. Even now, children are wearing bright neon shoes, and adults. Our clothing is usually pretty bright, but when it comes to our homes, there's a lot of beige and white and so forth out there, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a lot of fun to see a brightly colored building. It catches you off guard, and of course, being an artist, I'm attracted to bright colors. So textiles are also a huge inspiration, brightly colored textiles and patterns. And we're always looking for inspiration of different colors. This is a bus in Bolivia, and you wouldn't be called guilty of missing this bus because you would see it coming from a mile away. And each bus is painted differently. You can see this is the location that it's going to go. But each bus is a different color. So when you see your bus coming down the street that's painted bright blue and red, you know it's coming for you. And a lot of these buses were former school buses in the States. And they drive them down and paint them up to wonderful colors. I also like paint and texture that is aged. So faded in the sun and so forth, and you can see a lot of that in my work, that I don't have to have necessarily a bright color, but maybe a bright color that has been exposed to the elements for quite a while. This was a trip to India, and there is no perfect surface in India. Everything has been worn and aged, perhaps over many, many years. And you don't see that too much in the United States either. Things are painted and spiffied up pretty quickly. Textiles, color. In India, this is another Bolivia shot in El Alto, which is just above La Paz. There is a new architecture that is developing that is very brightly colored, and this is just a small building, but there are buildings 5 and 6 stories high that have a lot of mirrored surfaces on them and all of these graphic patterns. And against this landscape, it's quite jarring, and I love it. It catches you off guard. Again, a large swath of color that maybe you wouldn't see in nature unless you were there at the right time and place. Maybe a sea of sunflowers is probably the only thing I can think of that you would see. This large expanse of yellow. Hand-painted signage, also another inspiration. Color. This was a drum maker, a bongo, in Bolivia. Again, about color. South Africa, and you can see just a bit of recycling here. These are bottle caps, metal bottle caps made into their house number. This is the Bokot region of Cape Town, South Africa. And they haven't made lime green vinyl siding yet, so I love this lime green. And on a house, especially original. This is dividing the two properties. This was an apartment, this was an apartment. Apparently they came together or disagreed on their color choices, but this is Peru. And she was a vendor in a local market, and the hat, the especially tall hat, indicates that she is a business owner. So women that wear these wonderful felt hats, very entrepreneurial. Markets are also an inspiration. You'll see all different types of things. You never know what you're going to see as you come around the corner in a market in a developing country. And it's all about color and pattern. Maybe it's stacked fruits, maybe it's stacked baskets, but for an artist, it's a real, it's eye candy. And we always enjoy visiting markets. Again, signage in Bolivia. And then here's our after shot. And you can see definitely some coincidental happenings there. But a lot of people in town support our very brightly colored building, and a lot of people asked us if we were trying to be seen from a satellite. We find it very cheery, and it's happy to come home, especially on a great day, and we've had a lot of fun with it. Also inspired by pattern, and I have a lot of architecture images because when you see something of this scale and pattern, really catches you off guard. And perhaps that's why I work the scale that I do. I like to walk into a room and immediately, whoa, what is that confronting me? And I do enjoy pattern on a small scale in textiles and so forth, but you cannot ignore this type of pattern on this scale, and really appreciate that. These are in South Africa with the thatched roofs. This is the interior shot of one of those facilities, one of those houses. Again, old patterns. This is a rondavelle, typical style home in South Africa. Beautiful pattern. And we didn't think we could do anything quite like this on our building. It would take way too much time, but certainly appreciate those that do. I also like the combination of seeing, for instance, the pattern of her dress against the pattern of what she's creating. beaded clothing also looks very similar to these. This was in Bolivia, and this was just a closed storefront. I still, to this day, I don't know if it was perhaps a music venue of some sort that was closed for the day, but it caught my attention. Repeating patterns of the same graphic. India, again, come back to the textiles and seeing her work with her beautiful sari and this fabulous wall mural. This was a family compound in Kutch, India. Again, with this wonderful pattern on the exterior. When I teach children, I visit a lot of elementary schools, and I show them these images, and the kids have a natural affinity for liking this type of colorful work. I show them this image, and I explain that it was this young gentleman that was the artist of the interior of the house. And I ask a lot of the kids, well, do your parents let you paint on the walls? And there's always this, no. Textiles are a huge inspiration, not only for the pattern or the color, but for the technique that the textiles were assembled. I am a huge fan of watching block printing, weaving, hooking, embroidery, all different types of textiles. And a lot of people will tell me that my work looks like a textile, and because it's not a natural material, for instance, like a basket or a sisal or something like that, but it does feel maybe like a shag or some type of tapestry. And that's probably because of my love of textiles. Again, a combination of her skirt with her blouse or her sari against the building. This was their home. Fabulous door. This is me potentially looking at bringing textiles home. They had just come across, I believe these were textiles that hung on a camel. Maybe the head pieces on a camel and so forth, and they had just come across these, or they were cleaning them. It was a textile shop, and they were drying them out on the rooftop, so it's a great photo op. Again, the techniques. We happen to visit a lot of people working on their craft in their homes when we travel. So we get to see a lot of the techniques from step one through completion. And I am no textile artist, but I have seen a lot of the techniques in progress, and I'm certainly wowed by the amount of work that it takes to make a piece from beginning to end. We often don't think of that because a lot of times we go to the store, even as a craftsperson, we're buying the components that are pre-made, where, for instance, they maybe began with the cotton stage, especially in India. Quilters. And block printing. Watching his movements, he was so fluid in what he was doing. You could tell that he had done it many, many times over. So when I'm drilling, I can think about some of these people. This is a lot of work to drill as well, but probably not quite as intensive as this. This is Peru, and their textiles, mostly woven, a little bit of beadwork, but the combination of what they wear and patterns all together. When we look in the mirror, we're thinking, especially me, I'm looking at not textiles the way they do, for certain. We are probably exposed or influenced too much by what we see in fashion magazines. And they, of course, will have their own culture, but it's wonderful things that they put together and celebrate within their culture. Men as well, not just women. Again, seeing the process from the very beginning and the dyeing of the wool. The embroidery combined with weaving. Pom-poms. There's a fringe, the piece that is on the far wall as you come in on the right-hand side. When I created that piece, I was thinking of fringe and pom-poms. So quite a bit of textile influence. Cotton or wool. Her hair pieces here, most women in Peru and Bolivia have what is something like a pom-pom on their braids, and it is intended to look like an extension of their hair. And I've purchased several of those and have those in my collection. Again, probably an influence. Backstrap weaving. Guatemala, a procession, again a riot of color and pattern. These young ladies were selling bracelets. Bolivia and the different styles of hats, again, pom-pom. From the standpoint of fashion in the United States, that's just crazy, but they embrace it, they love it, it's part of their history. South Africa. There's strands of fabric. I have a collection of aprons, so oftentimes I'll be looking for the apron maker at the market. She has some great aprons. The fabric called shui shui. This very minute, tiny pattern, but with these wonderful large ruffles. This is a women's cooperative in South Africa. They work entirely on their own and their own imagery and all embroidery. And I love it that they are encouraged to create their own works of art. They don't have to follow a set pattern. And because of that, each piece is original. They can work from home, make an income for their family, and not be confined by rules or design patterns that a designer is imposing on them. They get to tell stories of maybe their life or their community. Beaded works. A lot of the things that I like about textiles is that they are not symmetrical, they are not perfect. And in my Boucherie series, which is the 22-foot piece on the left, I embrace that idea that textiles are not perfect. For instance, maybe something's been pulled too taut when it was woven or when it was stretched and hung on the wall, or perhaps an artist was weaving a piece or beading a piece and they ran out of a certain color, but they went ahead anyway and completed the piece, and they thought nothing of it. And maybe perhaps it's more beautiful because they did. And I certainly love that aspect of folk art and textiles. There is nothing really symmetrical happening up here. And I love it. Maybe a bit more symmetrical down here, but it's really beautiful what's happening up in that area. When I work with children, you see that happen quite frequently. If they're working, it's there is no inhibition to switch crayons or throw it out because they're not happy with it. And somewhere along the line, we start thinking we have to stay in the lines. Folk art and textiles, for some reason, stay away from that issue. I'm also obviously inspired by the use of recycled materials, and I see a lot of that as well in developing countries. This was in Namibia, and this was a house that they started with concrete and bottles, and they had some type of blowout here. It looks like they started to repair it, but I'm sure that everybody in the community was donating bottles. When you were inside, and you look through at the sun, it had something of a stained glass effect and was quite wonderful. And a lot of the things that we've seen in developing countries are very, very clever. Some people, obviously, maybe from a situation of desperation, they're trying to come up with products that they can potentially sell to somebody else or sell after they've made it into a piece of artwork, perhaps to a tourist and so forth. But I've seen a lot of very, very clever uses of materials that I would never even dream of utilizing in artwork. This was a cot that had a sisal or a rope covered with either a potato chip bag or a candy wrapper or something of that sort. And I imagine that it probably would have lasted quite a bit for a long period of time, but with this additional wrapping on it, it's probably gonna last for a very, very long time. I always like to call this the door if somebody wanted to sneak out late at night and not get caught, because this would not be a door that squeaks. These are the bottom of soles on a shoe, so pretty clever use of old rubber shoes. And the opposite here, this is an example of somebody making shoes out of tires. And I've seen this in 4 different countries, and I have 4 different pairs of shoes that I've purchased from tires and they all came to their own conclusion about what style to make, but she made a pair of shoes for me while I was standing there. I started out with, well, I think probably a size 9.5, and she outfitted it to a size 9. And again, what a creative use of tires. I know they shred tires up here in the States and potentially put them into asphalt and so forth, but this is another pretty smart idea. This, I believe, is the white wall of the tire. They covered it with maybe a black shoe polish, and then they carved back into it to get this design. That was in South Africa. This is the Owl House in South Africa. This is what is commonly called a folk art environment, maybe on a half acre or an acre, and where an artist has created their entire vision or world in an outdoor, usually, location. And this woman was somewhat ostracized from the community. It's actually a very sad story. She had a lot of owls. This is a Bachman owl. Again, in South Africa. While she was alive, town did not really embrace her. And since she has passed on, they've turned it into a tourist attraction. And quite a few people come to this location and support the village. So, unfortunately, she was underappreciated while she was alive. Oil cans as architectural units. adore. If you hung this in any contemporary gallery, I would stop and admire it. This is one of my favorite artists. It's the artist Nek Chan. He is from Chinagar, India, and this is pretty much the mother of all folk art environments. This is a pretty huge location. It's 26 acres. And at the time, he was building sculptures in an area behind his house. He did not own the land. And it was scheduled for demolition because they were going to build a highway through. And the town fathers happened to visit, and they saw, I would probably, at that time it was probably a half acre. And when the town fathers saw what he had created, they said, no, we can't tear this down. This is something special. And not only did they give him more land, but they gave him a staff of people to enlarge the facility to 26 acres. And it is now, my understanding, the second most visited site in India, next to the Taj Mahal. So again, another real opportunity, or an artist had a vision, and it is now helping his communities quite a bit. Broken china, broken bathtubs, both broken sinks. These are bangles, different, the glass bangles that women wear up their arms. Where do they go after they break? Well, he took them and created these fabulous, there are entire armies of monkeys and camels and figures that are all different sizes. Now, some of you must recognize this folk art environment. This is located right here in Springfield, Ohio. And as an admirer of folk art environments, I'm really happy that this is here and that it has been preserved, because there are not that many of them in the world, and what has existed sometimes has fallen to decay or been torn down. So I think it's great that this folk art environment is here in Springfield, and that it is still here. And the Kohler Center, I know, is partially responsible for that, so I think that's great. This is an environment in Detroit. Clever use of vinyl records. Those are probably worth something now, but really great pattern and use of something that is an outdated technology. This was in New York, and we were just driving by, and we're like, whoa, what is this? His yard does not look like a neighbor's yard. Little girl in Guatemala, obviously a homemade outfit, mermaid out of bottle caps, and nothing against her friends in the store-bought, but I sure do like her outfit. She was the only mermaid there. South Africa, bottle caps. This was an aloe plant. Very clever use of plastic bottle caps. And if you want people to come into your store, you've got to catch their eye. Plastic bags, of course, are a problem everywhere, but in South Africa, they make quite a few different, usually to the tourist trade items, and they have a sculptural frame underneath this, and then they wrap the plastic bags over them. But one way to get them out of our trees and streams. Another example of plastic bags as a textile. This is our back door. We use it as a mailbox or a place to drop off things from friends. This is a lighting fixture in our house. My brother-in-law is a contractor, so he's constantly breaking these measuring devices. The spring breaks, so created a light pendant. Our backyard, these are the inside of a stove. Also, obviously, mostly inspired by nature, and a lot of artists find inspiration in nature, and I am also guilty. One of my favorite animals, I think if I died and came back tomorrow, I would potentially come back as a bowerbird. The bowerbird is from Australia, and I have not had the opportunity to see a bowerbird yet. It's on my bucket list. But I'd have to come back as the male bowerbird, so I'd have to think about that a little bit. But the male bowerbird, in order to attract a female, builds a bower, and then he decorates it. So he will search the forest for different berries, different flowers, and he'll create entirely, individually, his own environment. And the female will fly by and decide whether or not she likes this environment, and if he's lucky, then he's found a mate. But there are videos online of the bowerbird, and this is serious stuff. If he sees one of these branches fall out of alignment, he will immediately run back up and tuck it back in. If a berry falls off the pile and it's not quite the way he wants it, he immediately runs back and fixes it, just so he's an interior designer, essentially, of the natural world. And what I find simultaneously sad and very interesting is that he has adapted. He's not finding perhaps as many berries in the forest, but he is finding bright blue bags or other items that he finds visually interesting. And he is using those in his bower. And I don't know if that's because he is potentially closer to a more populated area, or because he's lazy and it was easier to find these pieces. But also really interesting because he has adapted to what he is finding in his environment, and unfortunately that is sometimes trash. So you can see that this gentleman had a combination of probably natural items and trash. But sometimes they will have a palette. They'll stick to a palette or they'll stick to a shape. This gentleman preferred gray, silver, a little bit of green, and a little bit of red. And sometimes they have piles of shells too. And you can see he's a beautiful bird. But he's not the type of bird that, for instance, is a bright cardinal. He doesn't have the plumage that's very fancy, and he doesn't do a song and dance that's very flashy. He entirely relies upon his bower to attract a mate. This is a combination of natural and things that he's found, perhaps in a local parking lot. Another bird that I find beautiful is the kingfisher. And obviously because of his colors. In South Africa, there's a region called, it's called the Fynbos region, and it's an ecological area that grows the protea bush. And the series that I have that is called the Fynbos series was inspired by this particular protea bush, that and many other things, but this is where the title derived. And you might see some similarities. Different patterns or line work found in nature would also inspire some of the pieces in my Fynbos series. And I like to call this the mushroom minute. In Ohio, there are a lot of different varieties of mushrooms, and up until 3 years ago, I was not aware of that. And there are also a lot of very similar mushrooms in Ohio, and I've found both the variety and the similarities very interesting. From the standpoint of an artist, I want to see a lot of different mushrooms, colors, and shapes. But as an artist in an exercise, to identify them, I have 3 books. But it's very challenging when you have 2 mushrooms that look very similar, and a lot of people who think about eating them will tell you this. You really have to be certain that you are identifying the mushrooms correctly. And I really find it a very good exercise as an artist to really look at the fine details on specifically mushrooms, because a lot of our birds, the cardinal and the blue jay, for instance, are obviously very 2 different birds. But when you get into mushrooms, some of those lines are pretty difficult to determine, sometimes microscopically. It takes a microscope to differentiate mushrooms. But what I'm showing you here today are the mushrooms that I find beautiful and probably very varied all over central Ohio. So I did not know that there were this many mushrooms until 3 years ago. But everything from the gills to the spots to the stem, how they age, pretty gorgeous. And probably pretty poisonous on this one. It looks poisonous. And I do learn what the names are, but I do not do very well with Latin and promptly forget. But again, it's the exercise for me. And I didn't have anything like this in art school where we were taught to look at something that was so similar, so very, very similar, and find the differences. And I think this has been a way for me to challenge myself. Photography is also a challenge and a way to compose a shot and so forth. Another exercise. Slime mold. Perhaps inspiring the lichen series. This is my husband, Nathaniel. He is also an artist that works with recycled materials. He primarily works with mobiles and broken glass, for instance. This is probably between 24 inches and 30 inches wide. And we try not to steal materials from one another, but sometimes this is a bottle cap, a metal bottle cap. Toothbrush, that gives you an idea of the scale. Detail. And then out. These are keys, and these are saw blades. Our studio space, this is the dividing wall between our spaces where I keep all my materials. I try to keep most of the materials that I'm utilizing within sight as soon as I put them in a box and store them in the garden shed, for instance, out of sight, out of mind. So I do try to keep them visible. And sometimes by shape. These are circles. I am indebted to the community of Springfield and Yellow Springs for donating so many garden hoses, because the 30-foot piece would not have happened without that assistance of donations and garden hose. We put this out in front of the museum for about 6 months, and I came by once every 2 weeks and emptied it, and I would fill, as you can see, I would fill the truck. So Most of the work involved with these pieces, a lot of people think it's the creation of the piece, and it's actually the dismantling of the works. Or for instance, a piano, I have to dismantle it before I can utilize it. And with the garden hose, most of the work is in the cleaning process. It is a lot of work to clean garden hose, especially when it's done 100 times over. I think I probably have carpal tunnel, but I think I've figured out the most efficient route. This is some of my older work. This is an actual apple, so that gives you an idea of the scale and perhaps where I started. This was a piece that was probably created around 2000, 2001. I use a lot of bottle caps, both in my work and to teach in elementary schools. Again, old work, but you can see where I started. The moth series was started in 2003, and if you're familiar with COSI, there are 10 pieces at COSI, and the moth pieces range anywhere from 36 inches to up to 12 feet wide. License plates, car tires, lots of piano keys, records, and when I show these pieces to children, a lot of the times it becomes a history lesson. What's a record? For instance, this might be got a telephone handle on another piece, and what do you mean that's a telephone handle? They're only familiar with cell phones. So it does become outdated technology is definitely something that becomes a history lesson when looking at my pieces, and a scavenger hunt of sorts. This is from the inside of the piano. Let's see, those are slide carousels. Piano keys. This is the hammer that actually strikes the chord in the piano. Handlebars. Piano keys. Everything from the trunk drawer that's broken and so forth. Bicycle seats, plastic caps, more bicycle tires. This was a piece that was commissioned by Domino's. They wanted a moth and a beetle. So this is now hanging in their corporate offices in Ann Arbor. I liked it. It's Michigan and these are Ohio. And the Fine Boats series started in 2003. And again, I was talking about shag and pom-poms and fringe, only on a much bigger scale. Again, the Boucherie series, thinking about things being pulled too taut, running out of the color, completely inspired by textiles. These pieces are composed of multiple units. This piece, I believe, has close to 60 units. So they come apart, and each time they are installed, they are installed a little bit differently. So if you see it here, the next time you see it might change a little bit. The 30-foot piece has 100 units, and we drove a 26-foot rental Penske truck to get all of this work here to the museum. It took us 2 days to load, 1 day to unload, and 4 days to install. Gives you an idea. They could not have done it without my husband. I also teach at elementary school since about 2003, also summer art camps, and I find it very inspiring to work with children and see the creations they come up with. primarily I was teaching a project called bottle cap art. I was invited by a teacher out of Worthington to come to their school, and at the time I thought, well, I can't take rusty metal or wood that might have lead paint on it into the school. It's not a good idea. And in the corner of my room, my studio, was a bag of bottle caps, and I kind of had a light bulb moment. They're colorful, they're free, they're plentiful, unfortunately. And I knew that schools and children and their parents and their grandparents and the community would save them for different school projects. So I developed these different ideas, murals, outdoor pieces, and wrote 2 books, self-published them. And I've been fortunate to teach all over the country at different elementary schools with this same concept of bottle caps. And I've had a lot of fun. I've got one more school in, actually 2 more schools in Wisconsin in March, and then I think I will retire. But it is now an international thing. It is viral. This little lady is from Australia, and soon after when I started writing the books, her mother started writing me and said, when is the book going to be done? When's it going to be done? And soon after I published it, she sent me this photo. So, well, from Australia. Wisconsin, New Jersey, Gahanna, Ohio, right? Pennsylvania. It's a good lesson for children too when they see the quantity of caps that they've collected. You can talk about how many pounds go into a landfill. You can talk about how many items or how long it takes for an item to break down in the environment. But for children, the best way to learn, I find, is a visual. And when they see the heaps and the boxes of the caps that they've saved in maybe a couple of months' time, I think it's a visual that they carry with them. And it probably frightens them. I think that there is a lot of talk about environmental concerns in elementary schools, more so than when I was a child, and I think it's great. The school that I'm teaching at, and this is in Bexley Elementary School, the school that I'm teaching at in Wisconsin is an environmental elementary school, which I'd never heard of. So every subject that they teach, they try to put an environmental spin on it. New Jersey. I think that's the last image. So we can get the lights. I don't know who can do the lights. If anybody has any questions, anything about artwork or what we've seen travel-wise, something out here?
I have one.
Yes.
Oh, these bottle caps are so colorful. Have they been dyed or enhanced, or are they
haven't-
natural?
They are natural plastic.
Natural. Original.
Plastic colors,
Original.
that's right. And it's pretty interesting that they do actually come in that many colors. I've gotten that question many times. And in my own artwork too, I try to use the actual or natural color, because I like it when things have aged and they're faded. But the caps, it's amazing that they come in that many colors.
Hoses, those are all
Yes,
the colors that
yeah,
came in?
there is probably 1 or 2 hoses in there that has been painted. And again, who knew the garden hose came in so many colors? It's all about marketing. They want their hose in the aisle to stand out and be the one that's purchased. But yeah, I don't like to paint, and I typically don't like to glue. A lot of these pieces will travel, so I want them to stay intact, and glue is not and it's also not the environmental solution.
You use a lot of screws.
I do, yes. the last piece that I created for this show, I used the same DeWalt drill the entire time. My husband was on the other side of the studio, and I put in the last screw on the last wire on the last piece, and the drill, poof. A big poof of white smoke, so I timed it perfectly. I don't know.
Where can you buy your bottle cap book?
Well, I have some here, you know, but they are also available online at Lulu. It's a self-publishing company online, but I do have some here. So, any more questions? Well, thank you very much.